Magic Mountain by Thomas Mann is a fairly long book, about 800 pages in my version, but not a whole lot actually happens in the book. I'm only a little more than halfway through the book. I don't think I'll be able to finish it before the end of this month, but I just wanted to give some thoughts on how it's going and why I think I'm enjoying it so much, and why I'm enjoying it even though it could feel, and it does feel at times, like a very dense and slow book, a book without a lot of action in it. You get this character, Hans Castorp. He takes a trip to the Swiss Alps, to a sanatorium there, to visit his cousin Joachim, and time drags on. Hans Castorp gets diagnosed with some unhealthy lungs that require him to stay up there in the sanatorium instead of returning back to his hometown and to his job as a shipbuilder. And time drags on and drags on. Months follow months, years follow years. Eventually his cousin Joachim heads back to the flatlands. And so what's going on here? What's filling up all these pages? And so we find that Thomas Mann is fascinated with modernity and with the new inventions and the new ideas and the debates that are sort of circling in the beginning of the 20th century. At one point, towards the middle of the book, Hans Castorp adopts this hobby of studying science and studying botany and studying astronomy. And in his own room, his own cell in the sanatorium, he has plants that he watches and he studies. And his close friend, Settembrini, who's the Italian humanist and literary figure, he also is involved in these sort of lofty, intellectual, modern pursuits. There's one scene where Hans Castorp meets Settembrini in like a mailroom, where Settembrini collects a package from the mail, and Settembrini explains what he's working on. He's working on this literary project. So, quote, "Working from Darwin's theory of evolution, the League for the Organization of Progress advances the philosophical viewpoint that humankind's innermost natural purpose is its own self-perfection. It concludes further that it is the duty of every person who desires to satisfy that natural purpose to cooperate in the cause of human progress. Many have followed that call. There are significant numbers of them in France, Italy, Spain, Turkey, even in Germany. I, too, have the honor to be on the League's membership rolls. A large-scale scientific program of reform has been drawn up, embracing all presently known possibilities for perfecting the human organism. The problem of the health of our race is being studied, including the examination of methods for combating its degeneration." And he goes on and on and on. And he talks about this massive, all-encompassing, capacious project, studying human progress, accumulating knowledge. And this is really the central axis, I think, around which the book revolves, around all the discourse revolves. It's the bustle of modernity and progress. There's one amazing scene when they go out from the sanatorium, Hans Castorp and his cousin and one other person, Frastor, I believe, and they see a movie together. And he describes the effect. Of course, this is a brand new technology, just being popularized at the time. The effect that seeing a movie for the first time has on moviegoers. After the movie's over, quote, "There was no one to clap for, to thank, no artistic achievement to reward with a curtain call. The actors who had been cast in the play they had just seen had long since been scattered to the winds. They had watched only phantoms, whose deeds had been reduced to 1,000,000 photographs, brought into focus for the briefest of moments, so that as often as one liked, they could then be given back to the element of time as a series of blinking flashes." And in this setting, this exciting moment of history where Technology is changing. People are experiencing things that were never before possible. There are serious philosophical questions that emerge, and two voices that debate these questions are, on the one hand, Herr Settembrini, and on the other hand, this guy, Nafta. A little bit past the middle of the book, they get in a big debate, a political debate about religion and politics, and it's very, very long, and it's a little bit abstruse and obscure, but this Nafta character is arguing on the side of a sort of theological, theocratic communism, whereas Settembrini, on the other hand, is arguing for more liberal values, which is to say democracy and freedom and things like that. And part of the climax of this debate is Settembrini formulates a very precise question for Nafta. Quote, "Here in the presence of these two attentive young people," referring of course to Hans Castorp and his cousin Joachim, "answer one question for me, please. Do you believe in truth, in objective scientific truth, that to strive for it is the highest law of morality, that its triumphs over authority are the most glorious page in the history of the human spirit?" It's classic Settembrini. Heads turned from Settembrini to Nafta. Hans Castorp's more quickly than Joachim's. "Such a triumph is an impossibility," Nafta replied, "because the authority is man himself, his interests, his dignity, his salvation, and there can be no contradiction between man and truth. They coincide. Whatever profits man is true. Nature herself is summarized in him. In all of nature, only he is created, and nature is solely for him. He is the measure of all things, and his salvation is the criterion of truth." And we'll stop there. But that's the debate. And the sense we get is that there's this messianic fervor in the air. There's anxiety over these massive questions of eschatology and the meaning of life and the meaning and trajectory of history and the relationship between human beings and knowledge, and which one is subservient to the other, and what is morality. And the technology, the perspective, the attitude that characterizes this modern age, that made possible these scientific advances, is the technology of the scientific observations, of the studying, the way Hans Castorp studies the flowers in his room with a scientist's eye, and reading books and studying the stars and the constellations. But the paradox and the way the whole book is sculpted and architected, and the complexity, is that just like Hans Castorp studies his flowers in his room with a scientific eye, he, Hans Castorp, is like one of those flowers. He is in the sanatorium as a patient, being studied, being documented, being regimented, his hours being observed all the time, his temperature taken and jotted down and tracked, being x-rayed. When Hans Castorp sees the x-ray of his hand for the first time, quote, "Under that light, he saw the process of corruption anticipated, saw the flesh in which he moved decomposed, expunged, dissolved into airy nothingness, and inside was the delicately turned skeleton of his right hand, and around the last joint of the ring finger, dangling black and loose, the signet ring his grandfather had bequeathed him, a hard thing, this ore with which man adorns a body predestined to melt away beneath it, so that it can be free again and move on to yet another flesh that may bear it for a while. He beheld a familiar part of his body, and for the first time in his life he understood that he would die. This is the shock and the earthquake of modernity, the vertigo we get as we conquer nature and see things for the first time that none of our ancestors could have seen. It reorients us. It makes us question our place in the cosmos, our place in history. And so Hans Castorp is the scientist, but he's the subject. He's the subject of the scientific experimentation, of scientific observation. The message, what we learn from the book, is that that's a posture. That's a lifestyle. That's a temptation. It's an attraction. Hans Castorp is pulled in by that life. And other people, Settembrini, for example, and Joachim, they rebel against it. They don't tolerate it. They're not interested in living in the sanatorium indefinitely. But importantly, Joachim is drawn to another lifestyle, which in many ways is similar. He's drawn to the army lifestyle. And when he explains to Hans Castorp what it's like, to march in formation and to follow orders, Hans Castorp is a little bit taken aback. He's surprised by the whole ordeal that he's hearing about. But of course, those two lifestyles run in parallel. The regimentation, the observation, the tracking of progress, the rules, the regulations, the timetables. And it's the atmosphere that suffuses the whole book that all these characters are swimming in. And of course, I think one of the most important plot elements of this book that I never can stop thinking about is that we are on the trajectory towards World War I. That's where the world is careening towards. So all this shock and excitement, this reorganization that's going on, a kind of new Copernican revolution, is not going to redeem us the way that so many of these characters are hoping.